welcome to Surrey Heath Cast, a new pod, video cast, depending how you're finding us, all about local news and politics here in Surrey Heath. My name's Jacqui and I've lived in Lightwater and Windlesham and the surrounding areas for about 30 years now, so I really feel very passionately about what happens to me and my family and my friends and all the residents here locally. You may remember me from, if you're old enough, from the Crimewatch programme. I was a presenter for about 16 years. And after retiring from the police, I went into all sorts of things: broadcast news and factual programming, business and the charitable sectors as a consultant. I did some national campaigning, and which I still do on various issues, plus my day job, which is as a counsellor and psychotherapist. Al, tell us about you.
Oh, well, thanks, Jacqui. So I'm Al Pinkerton. I am an associate professor of geopolitics at Royal Holloway, University of London, where I teach my students and I do research. And basically my specialist area of research is international border and boundary disputes. So basically anywhere where there's geopolitical instability in the world, I'm likely to be there or have a very strong interest in it. I do lots of work in, for example, places like Cyprus, the British Overseas Territories, particularly the ones with contested sovereignty. I've recently been in Sudan, and I'll be going to the Falkland Islands again early next year. I've lived in Surrey Heath for, I think, about 9 years. Started off life in Surrey Heath over in Chobham, and now live between Camberley and Lightwater, where it is an exceptionally wet day. So forgive the audio quality. If you can hear the sound of pinging rain, that is because there is rain pinging off the roof in our kitchen right now.
Grim, isn't it? It's pretty grim today.
Pretty bad day.
Sucking you dry and absolutely hands out to you for all that knowledge, and I'm sure that we're going to benefit for some really interesting insights, particularly in your work around borders, which is so relevant in international news at the moment. And in fact, well, what a time to be launching a podcast about politics. So much is happening on a national, international level. And we're not going to shy away, are we, from delving into what all that means for us all here in Surrey Heath, because it can seem such a long way away sometimes. One of the things we're also going to do is be following Al as he bids to become Surrey Heath's next MP at the next general election, in about 2 years' time. Let's face it, most of us, I certainly didn't have a clue what it takes to become an MP. And where did it all start for you, Al? How did you get involved? What made you throw your hat in the ring?
Well, I started off in exactly the same position as you are now. I had no idea what it would take, but my gosh, it's a very steep learning curve. So for me, it all started 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago exactly, back in 2019. In fact, this was 3 years ago. This was the campaign period in the general election in 2019, because of course it was that very late end of year, early December general election that we had. I had only joined the Liberal Democrats, which is the party that I felt were my most natural home, earlier that summer, 2019. And the reason I joined, the reason I got in touch with the Surrey Heath Lib Dems was because I was just so distraught at the things that were happening in the country at that time. You probably will remember that was the time when Brexit was stuck in Parliament, and this was 3 years after the Brexit vote, and things just didn't seem to be working out. The Brexit, people voted for Brexit, but nobody voted for the kind of hard Brexit that was being foisted on the country at the time, and certainly nobody voted for the chaos that then followed. And I decided that I'd step forward. I'd make inquiries to the Lib Dems, and they were looking for a new parliamentary candidate. The previous person who'd been here she lived in Woking, and they were really looking for somebody local. And I thought, this is it. It's time to put your money where your mouth is. I've been shouting at Question Time, and I've been shouting at the radio and LBC for years, and it was time for me to come forward and to start sharing my views and values, and to see whether we can make a positive change for Surrey Heath. So for me, it was an incredibly steep learning curve, from joining the party in June 2019 to being selected as the parliamentary candidate in, I think it was August 2019, and then suddenly this surprise general election that nobody expected in December. And so 3 years ago today, I would have been out, probably in weather not dissimilar to this, on railway platforms, in businesses, talking to people about what was happening in their lives at that particular moment, and picking up information about the things that they wanted to change and figuring out whether we could try and make things better for them.
Well, I mean, hats off to you, Al, because it is a big leap between throwing at the things at the TV, which I do on a regular basis, to actually putting yourself forward. And I just think it's amazing, and hats off to you for doing that. But how realistic is it for you to, unseat an incumbent who's been there since 2005? This is a traditional Tory area, but you do get a sense that people are looking for change. So how realistic is it?
I think it's very realistic now. And I think in 2019, we really showed what was possible. We were in the top 10 swings in the country, away from the Conservatives towards us, in an election that, of course, generated a huge majority for Boris Johnson. So despite the fact that the national picture was very positive for the Tories here, we made massive gains, to the extent that I'll never forget David Dimbleby on the television during election night 2019 saying, wow, something has happened in Surrey Heath because of the swing towards us. We didn't win, but we made huge gains. And that's continued since then. We've had very good local by-election results here as well. Most recently, Liz Noble in Bisley and West End, who scored a stonking victory over the Conservatives. And with, a huge majority. We've now also got an amazing county councillor down in Ash and Ash Vale, which of course is part of Surrey Heath constituency, even though it's not part of Surrey Heath borough. So those are two really key places for us. And I think the other thing I just noticed is that people are coming up to me on the street unprompted. And they, first of all, they recognize me, which is, of course, very flattering and slightly terrifying at times. But they're just saying, keep going, keep doing it. We need the change that you promised. But listen, I don't pretend. Being a Lib Dem in Surrey Heath it's not easy. But then I wasn't looking for something easy. If I had been one of those kind of people with aspirations to be a career politician, I would have done what they all do. I would have done what our current MP did, which was to look for somewhere that seems safe and to get myself parachuted in there. But that's not what I'm about. I live here. This is my home. I care deeply about this place. It's where my family live. It's where my kids play rugby and football and cricket at the weekend. It's where my children go to school. It's an area that I want to see change and become better. I'm not doing this to become a career politician. I'm doing it because I think we genuinely need to change. And given that we've had an MP here, a Conservative MP, forever, and we've got a Conservative county council and a Conservative borough council, I think it's time to break that triple lock, to break that monopoly, because do you know what? Having alternative voices is a good thing. It improves democracy, it improves decision making, and you can get things done. It's not always about being part of the same club. Sometimes you need to have noisy, vocal, but effective opposition to try and get things moving along. And I think this area needs to. I hear from everybody, this area needs to feel change. People feel that they're out of control over their own lives because of mass overdevelopment that's been done. Decisions like the purchasing of Camberley Mole here was another big one that people feel really angry about, particularly on days like this when there will be water pouring through the roof and can't even seem to pay the bills to get that repaired. So there's loads that people want to see changed around here. And that's what this podcast is about, isn't it? It's about trying to listen to people as much as it is sharing our news and views.
I think you're absolutely right. There's that sense of actually us being citizens and not consumers anymore, actually taking an interest. I've been fairly sort of non-political, to be honest. I didn't feel I had a voice in Surrey Heath or a vote that made any difference one way or another. And certainly talking to you, I feel a lot more engaged. And, having had children myself who've gone through the school system locally, although they're all adults and grown up now. But, I I still think about the effects nationally on what their lives are going to be like, what their future holds for them and their children. And I think our votes need to have us, and our voices need to be heard, and we need to have a say in that. Interestingly, we've got the autumn statement coming up on Thursday. We're recording this on Tuesday morning. And I know that you were out and about in Camberley Town Centre just after the last budget, which, my God, let's face it, what an impact Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss's budget. But I think what you found, the conversations you had, really exemplify what you've just described. And I know you did a little film from there, which we're going to go and show now.
And I've got that film here, so I know we're gonna talk about it afterwards. But listen, let's play the video.
Let's listen first.
Yeah, it's been an amazing morning out on the streets of Camberley this morning, with residents filling out our big board, looking at Trussonomics. Is Kwasi Kwarteng's budget a reckless gamble? And I'll just talk you through some of the answers that we've had. The budget will help tackle Britain's cost of living crisis. Question 1. Overwhelming majority disagreeing that this is going to help in any way with the cost of living crisis. I think we all feel like that. I trust the government to look after me and my family. Again, an overwhelming majority. People just do not trust this government, that their intentions are to look after themselves or their families. I believe this is a fair budget. Again, I believe this is unfair. 350 stickers virtually in this box. And finally, Britain needs a change of government. I think this is a really interesting question. Clearly, the vast majority of people said yes, we do need a change of government, but people were also just really concerned about general instability. They cannot cope with the constant changes that have taken place. They've clearly been destabilised as a nation, and people are clinging on to some kind of rock. It doesn't mean they support the government, but they're just concerned about further instability and the effect that will have on the economy. We've had an overwhelming turnout this morning. It's a great day of action for the Surrey Heath Lib Dems. Thanks to everyone who put their sticker on the board, and this board is going to be popping up all across Surrey Heath in the weeks to come. Thanks again.
So that question, was it a reckless budget? I think we all know the answer to that. So what was the response that you got from actually talking to people about that poll?
Well, I mean, you can tell. I mean, that people were incredibly motivated that morning, and clearly we did that a few weeks ago. I mean, how many prime ministers have we had since then? Well, 2. And of course, she and her chancellor, have gone. But I mean, people were terrified. They could see the effect of on the stock market and on the bonds market. I mean, we've never known anything like that moment in our national history, just about, where a chancellor can make a so-called mini budget, but fundamentally rip up the rule book of how the UK has done economics, the kind of conversation that happens between government and financial markets that has persisted for a century. And even though they've gone, the impact of what they did has not gone. A lot of what Jeremy Hunt is going to have to do on Thursday is going to try and repair the damage that has been inflicted by that so-called mini budget. I mean, a lot of people made a lot of money out of that mini budget. Speculators, financiers, and others made a lot of money, and that was our money. That money just doesn't come from nowhere. That is money that effectively the government has more or less handed them straight away as profit on the trades that they've been making on long-term government bonds and on betting on the stock market. So estimates suggest, and the Resolution Foundation published a report this past week, it was in Sunday's Observer, that said that 30 billion of the black hole that we apparently now need to fill, according to Jeremy Hunt, that has come as a direct consequence of the Kwarteng Truss budget. So they may have gone, but their legacy, very tragically for all of us taxpayers, lives on. And that lives on because of the decisions that they made, the taxes that they chose to cut, and the scare that they gave the international markets.
Yeah, because albeit there are sort of international pressures, and everybody is struggling across the world, aren't they, with interest rates increase. But this this feels like we've sort of had a double trouble in many respects, and that translates right through to everybody's pockets. Anyone who's got a mortgage, anybody's got a loan to buy a car, or needs a loan to start a new business. This has direct consequences to people who live in Surrey Heath.
It does. It does. And you're right. Absolutely. We are living in a turbulent geopolitical world right now. The war in Ukraine, Vladimir Putin's aggression absolutely has had dramatic inflationary effects. The COVID hangover, absolutely, that is another major global pressure. Of course, for us in the UK, and Bank of England former bankers are now making this very clear, Brexit is a continuing pressure on us. It has absolutely smashed our international trade with Europe. That's affecting our businesses, and that's also impacting on our ability to raise the required funds to cope with all of these other changes. So some of the stuff is exogenous. It's stuff that we can't control, but it's out there. But a lot of this stuff is self-inflicted as well. Self-inflicted in terms of votes that were taken in 2016. Some people feel that the case was accurately made and a vision was given. I increasingly think that Project Fear is becoming Project Reality, and of course, concerns were dismissed as Project Fear at the time. But that quasi-trust budget, those 44 days of the Truss premiership, is going to be a legacy that we have to live with for many decades to come.
It is quite terrifying, isn't it, how easy it is for somebody to reach that high office and yet not have the basic competence to see the results of such dramatic change on our economy, which was already struggling, as you say, because of many other issues worldwide, and it's important to say that, I think. But it's a
really interesting point.
Sorry.
No, it's a really interesting point, Jacqui. I've heard a lot of people say one of the great, the British system has been shown to work through all of this, and we were able to get rid of a bad prime minister very quickly and efficiently. And there is a truth in that. And they were saying, you couldn't do that so easily with an American president. You'd have to wait, for the next electoral cycle. And there's some truth in that too. But the counter argument to that, of course, is that you can't become an American president by being parachuted in by 160,000 Republican or Democratic members, as you could with 160,000 Tory members. An American president has to be put through an incredibly rigorous process of primaries and then a national vote. I mean, the fact that Liz Truss could slip through this process that the Conservative Party concocted in the summer and then emerged as the prime minister. And let's face it, she said to everybody what she was going to do. She was very upfront about it. And Rishi Sunak, to his credit, was saying, if you do that, if you pull that lever, it will have this effect. And do you know what? She pulled that lever and it had exactly the effect that he had said, which is perhaps unsurprising, given that he had been the Chancellor of the Exchequer for 2 years. So I think it's an incredible weakness, not necessarily of the British democratic system, but certainly of the Conservative Party, that they were able and thought it a good idea to elect somebody with views that were so demonstrably bad for the UK economy. I mean, the one thing I did agree with her about was the need for growth and productivity increases. Of course, we need to grow as an economy, but you don't grow an economy by cutting the economy. You don't grow an economy by cutting taxes, by undermining investment, by shattering your relationship with the international markets, because you need the markets to be working to create that free flow of finance that lets you get done the business that you want to do. So it was a mad economic ploy. And of course, we know it wasn't really her ploy in the first place. It came from various shady think tanks based in and around the Westminster area, the Tufton Street think tanks, as they're often called, the Taxpayers Alliance, the Institute of Economic Affairs, and these other organizations that don't reveal the source of their funding and yet claim charitable status.
I do, yes, I think that's interesting, because you do get a sense that the Tory party itself has completely lost its way. The fiscal responsibility of John Major and that sort of era, and before that, whatever your politics were, you had a sense that there would always be a government that you could roughly trust not to do anything too stupid.
Well, of course, there was a one nation conservative. Yeah, they've gone. The Majors, the Heseltines, the Ken Clarks. Those kind of figures. Those who, even if you disagreed with their policies, you didn't think they were reckless. They weren't kind of ideological zealots. Yes, they exist on a political spectrum. But I'm afraid that the Conservative Party has fundamentally changed. Boris Johnson purged anybody that would disagree with him, and brought in people who, in many cases, really aren't fit to be MPs at all, in my opinion. But what they were willing to be was loyal. They were willing to be loyal, and really, what we have now is a Conservative Party of two parts. Possibly more parts than that, to be honest. But there are still a few fairly decent eggs left in there, but I'm afraid the asylum has been taken over in many ways, and we've got some really problematic people, and you can see it just by following some of them on Twitter, and some of the things they say about asylum, everything from the situation we have with asylum seekers in the Channel through to the support that they seem to have for people like Donald Trump. I mean, you can very quickly get a measure of the kind of characters we're talking about by the things they reveal of themselves on social media.
I mean, famously, we saw our local MP, lauding and supporting Trump over in the States after his election. And that actually felt quite like a watershed moment for me. Again, I felt there was we were stuck in this Conservative rut here. However, I didn't think that sort of reckless, chaotic style of Trump would ever touch our shores, and yet there was a tangible link. Our local MP was sort of going over there and cozying up to him and ostensibly supporting his style of government. And that's exactly what we got with Boris Johnson, isn't it? It's as you say, it's the lack of talent and the very small pool of people from which our ministers are being drawn now, which is hence the recycling system. They, even if they get sacked for the most heinous offences, they're back because, hey, who else is there?
There's nobody else. Yeah, you're right. Rishi Sunak, he has an unenviable task. He's fishing in a very small pond for government ministers. So he's had to bring back, frankly, most of the people that previous people have got rid of for incompetence or lying or bullying. And of course, that then affects a prime minister's ability to do the right thing. We've had in the past week or so, 2 ministers, or at least 2 people who sit on cabinet, accused of bullying. And Rishi Sunak has defended both right up until the point, at least in Gavin Williamson's case, where he's had to resign because it became too politically intolerable.
And you do wonder how long Dominic Raab's going to last.
Well, exactly. And he is the other one. How long will he last? How long will people keep defending him? And who can replace him?
They usually say if the Prime Minister says he has a complete faith in them, that they generally have about 24 hours. It's been longer than that, so you never know.
And he's got away with 72 so far, I think.
But it's interesting because actually this week, in 2 days' time, we've got that autumn statement that we've been waiting for ever since the debacle of the last one. Do you have a sense yet of what's coming and down the line at us? Obviously taxes but what's Surrey Heath going to be looking out for in particular, the residents of our constituency?
Well, I think Surrey Heath voters can look out for a few distinctive things on Thursday. I mean, clearly all budgets, some people have an instant reaction to them, but then I think the reality, the full implications will not come out probably until the Sunday newspapers, because they have to work through the financial data and think about real life case studies of people and how it will impact their lives. But of course, I suppose this isn't really too different to many recent budgets in that so much stuff has been kite flown in advance of this budget. For the past several weeks, we've heard about ideas about cuts, tax raises. This is going to be the most devastating budget in recent years. Some of that is about expectation management, but they've also clearly been testing out ideas as well with the public. I think, for me, the thing that's absolutely likely to happen is the so-called stealth tax increases. So what we mean by stealth tax is clearly we're in a really high inflationary moment at the moment. What inflation, 10, 11, 12%. What is likely to happen is that they just will not, uprate the bands on tax. So more people will be brought into tax because of inflationary rises. So without doing anything at all, the government are going to be generating more tax because they have not uprated tax to meet inflation. Okay, so and that's likely to raise an awful lot of money. There could very well be many billions of pounds, up to possibly higher than 20 billion pounds of increased taxes just because of the inflationary nature of the economy right now. I think also people might expect to see big announcements about scrapping large infrastructural projects. So there's talk about Sizewell C being scrapped. There's talk about the Northern Powerhouse Rail being scrapped and HS2. So they could go, that would be instant savings, although of course a lot of money has already been spent on the development of those ideas, and that will have implications for the companies and the contracts.
Well, Sizewell C presumably would be our sort of energy policy for the future.
Well, that's right. So in order to try and get an instant saving on the budget sheet, on the balance sheet, they'll be sacrificing long-term growth and long-term productivity because, that's energy security and energy resilience. Even if you disagree with HS2 and getting between London and Manchester slightly faster, what that rail line was going to do was release so much other rail capacity already on those lines for freight, to take trucks off of road, to help meet our environmental agenda. And Northern Powerhouse Rail, where does that leave levelling up if that goes? So it would be an instant saving on the balance sheet, but ultimately it might come at a long-term cost. And that's actually one of my major concerns right now. How much of this is short-term and how much is really thinking about the long-term and making sure that this country is going to be firing on all cylinders in 10, 15 and 20 years' time?
And I'm being an old cynic, I think I'm also wondering, and I suppose I'll be looking out for what will be strategically involved in the budget, bearing in mind there's an election in 2 years. Will they hold back on things?
Yeah.
To push them down the line? So
there's a few examples I think we can expect to see on that. So I think first of all, one of Boris Johnson's big things, and actually, and this is one thing I do agree with him, is he wanted to try and tackle the social care crisis that we have in this country. And one of his policies was to place a cap on social care. So people would not, for example, be forced to sell their houses in order to pay for social care. So there'd be a
national insurance rise, wasn't it?
There'd be a national insurance rise to pay for this new mechanism that meant there was going to be a ceiling on the amount that you had to contribute to your own social care. And the idea was that meant that people would be able to live in their own houses for longer. So the national insurance has, I think that rise has gone. That may be reinstated. We'll see. But I think what they'll do is, I would not be at all surprised if that social care cap gets kicked into the long grass. They will not be bringing in that cap, and that could save, some estimates suggest, up to about 2 billion. But again, here's the question: what impact does that have on people? People now who are facing social care costs spiraling, they may have very complicated needs. Sometimes those needs aren't even being met because, of course, we've got so few people now working in our social care system. We've got incredible employment shortfalls. But if that cap isn't brought in, and more people are having to try and find social care, then they're going to be directly impacted by kicking that into the long grass. But I wouldn't be surprised if they did that, because then effectively they'll make it the next government's problem. And I think the Tories at the moment are playing a game where they know they're going to lose the next election.
Yeah, sorry?
No, and I was just going to say one other thing is, expect the government to allow local councils to raise local council taxes. So this will be at counties and boroughs in particular. And again, the reason that they'll do that is that the government will say, well, we're not raising the taxes on you, but we're enabling local councils to do that. But of course, what the government have been doing systematically over the past decade is they've been cutting the funding that flows from central government to local government, therefore forcing local government to raise taxes locally rather than to receive it from the centre. So in other words, the government are forcing local governments into raising this money. And this morning on the news, I've been listening, several local authorities are saying that they are on the verge of bankruptcy. I think I heard that Kent and Hampshire, which are actually both Conservative-run councils, are both on the verge of bankruptcy. And I think this is about, again, preparing us for a message. Council tax will go up. The government will deny that they're responsible for it, and instead will blame local authorities for having to do that.
It's really quite terrifying. And as somebody who's self-employed, and you look at the impact already that austerity has had on places like Camberley Town Centre, you can only imagine that things aren't going to get any better for people like in small businesses.
Well, exactly. So council tax may go up, so might local business rates, for example. There'll certainly be a greater draw on us as local taxpayers. And then what effect does that have on our local economies? It's not good. Everybody is going to be poorer as a consequence of this budget in a time when I think we all feel financially straitened anyway, with the cost of living going up, the cost of our shopping or weekly shop going up dramatically. So this is going to be a really tough few years, undoubtedly. I think things will and can get better, but I think for things to get genuinely better, I think we need a government that has a 20, 30-year vision to rebuild this country from the bottom up, because if anyone has traveled overseas in recent times, you can see how far behind we've fallen. The state of repair of schools, roads, rail, energy infrastructure, data infrastructure, everything seems to be crumbling in this country, whereas other countries seem to be able to power ahead with great success. That's because of policies. That's because of government. That is because of votes that have been taken and things that have been delivered or not delivered. And people will need to decide, what do they want for the future of this country. I personally think we need a big, bold vision that's going to take us through the next 20, 30 years.
I suppose that's why politics matters, at a local level, if we can create that change from there. It's it remains to be seen what happens. We'll maybe have a chat about that budget once it's out and the implications become more obvious as to how it's going to affect us here in Surrey Heath. And if you run a business in the area, please get in touch with us. We'll be putting up an email address later on, and let us know what you think the impact is going to be on you, and maybe have a couple of people on to discuss it. I'm going to change that
in the next session.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to change tack a bit, because Sunday was a really important day. I mean, even though I like to think of myself as still relatively young, and you certainly are. And, it's hard sometimes, isn't it, to look back and think about wars that happened, outside of our lifetime. And in fact, sometimes our parents' lifetime. And my father served in the Second World War. So I was, and he was sunk a couple of times in convoys going across the North Atlantic. So it felt very real for me, and every year it does on Remembrance Sunday. But I know you have a particular interest in the Falklands War, which also had its 40th anniversary this year. How did you get involved in that whole issue? Is it through your work as a professor?
Yeah, well, it goes back all the way to my PhD research. So I spent several months living in the Falkland Islands during my PhD, way back
with
when.
The penguins.
With 300,000 penguins, and probably even more sheep than there are penguins, and an amazing community of people. And yeah, I mean, you could still feel, and I was there back my first visit was 2002, 2003. And I've developed a very strong bond to that place. I mean, largely because it felt very familiar to me. It does. Stanley, the capital, does feel like a little Western Isles town. But the people were warm and generous, and I was exploring different elements of the Falklands War and the sovereignty dispute that, of course, that exists between the UK, the Falkland Islands, and Argentina. And as part of my work, I interviewed lots of veterans, lots of former soldiers and servicemen and women who had taken part in the Falklands conflict. And I've been back several times since. So I was an official observer of the Falkland Islands referendum in 2013. And then I went back in 2013 at the invitation of the Ministry of Defence to go and talk to the soldiers and the airmen and the sailors who are based at Mount Pleasant, which is the main base in the islands. So I was giving lectures about regional geopolitics and instability and the creation of exclusive economic zones and all of that stuff that I do as part of my day job. And one of the extraordinary opportunities that I had during that time, the deputy commander of British forces in the South Atlantic, he was just about to retire from his role, it was November. And so he chartered a number of the helicopters on base, and we flew to several of the cemeteries and memorial sites around the island. And we lay wreaths of poppies, and we said prayers and read poems at various places around the island, including the most extraordinary thing, flying out over Falkland Sound and dropping a wreath onto the hull of sunken ships from the Falklands War, rededicating the memory of us all to what had been given in 1982, which of course had been over 1,000 lives of both Argentine and British service people, and of course 3 Falkland Islanders as well. And I've had a very strong connection with the Falkland Islands ever since, and I work very closely with the Falkland Islands government. And this year, I'm involved in something called the Falklands 40 Schools competition, which has been working with young people to engage them in the story of the Falkland Islands, which I'm afraid to say it is often too often told through the spectre or lens of war. And when you think about the Falklands, it's only about the conflict. And what we want to try and do is to show that the Falkland Islands, particularly since 1982, has become an incredibly thriving, democratic, modern, forward-looking population. I mean, they're still 8,000 miles away, and still broadband isn't great, and mobile phone networks are very expensive, but they are an extraordinary people. And I think the UK could learn a lot from them if we remembered them a little bit more when we thought about the modern UK, because Falkland Islanders consider themselves very much to be part of the UK.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I feel that our British overseas territories in general are a bit neglected. And I certainly back in 1982, I can remember when it all sort of started breaking, thinking, where the hell's the Falklands? Why do I know nothing about this? And starting to look into it and actually seeing the footage and talking to the islanders, there was a genuine connection. You suddenly thought, yeah, this feels really familiar. This feels like UK people. They're 8,000 miles away, felt, incongruent in a way. You did feel like you were talking to somebody in the local shop when our news broadcasters were out interviewing people. So it did start that connection. Felt very real and was established as a result of all that. And it's wonderful the work you're doing in highlighting, the fact that they're still there and thriving, and what that was all about, and what that was for, and what those lives were lost for, and remembering those, I think, is amazing.
Well, I'll be taking 8 lucky young students from the UK to the Falkland Islands in February next year. So if the timing works, Jacqui, then maybe one of these Surrey Heath casts will suddenly be Stanley cast, and I'll be coming to you from the South Atlantic if I can get the Wi-Fi to work.
Take a booster with you. It shows you how much I know, but wouldn't that be great?
It would be absolutely brilliant. We should try and do that. Let's try and do a live link from Stanley next year.
I think so, definitely. So, well, let's bring this to a close, this one, and I hope it's the first of many. And that's up to us, up to you, our lovely residents of Surrey Heath constituency. What do you think? Would you like to do more of these and to talk about some issues that maybe matter to you, and the effect that national politics and how that filters down into our everyday lives. So please let us know what matters to you, what we'd like us to explore, discuss, perhaps explain. We can do some research and explain. Al particularly can explain, you know, things like the effect of the war in oh my God,
Ukraine. Yes.
It's been a long day. The war in Ukraine, you know, and we're already hearing at the moment, you know, great strides being made in pushing the Russians back. Hopefully that holds, will remain to be seen. But isn't it extraordinary how the effect of that war is what is happening, effect on what is happening over here. So please, if you're watching this and you'd like to get involved, please email us. You can see the address go running along the bottom there. Thank you for watching. Al, would you like to say a few words?
No, I just repeat exactly what you said. We can discuss, we can research issues, big, small, national or local. We can bring in some special guests. So if you've got particular requests that you want to talk about particular subjects, we'll try and bring in experts. We believe in experts on this program, Jacqui.
We do. Unlike somebody else who won't be mentioned.
Despite the fact that we may know quite a bit about local and national issues, we may not know it all. So we'll bring in the people that can help us to navigate through the very complex waters of the international and local scene. And just thank you very much for watching. And please do join us again when we do Surrey Heath Cast next.
Bye.
See you. Bye-bye.